As a historian, of course, as a public intellectual, but as a historian, you have a long view of these things. Where is this coming from? Why is nationalism, Bharat Mata, why has this acquired so much of salience today? And is there some easy way in which critics of the government can deal with this kind of pressure? Because once you go down that whole nation under threat or jingoism, it's a slippery slope, and you have TV channels now. I don't recall earlier referring to every dead soldier as a martyr, but every channel now says soldiers were martyred. So the whole language of public discourse has become very overtly nationalist, which leaves me a little bit worried as a journalist. I'm sure worries you as a historian. But how do you explain this newfound salience that the nation has?
Well, I think it hasn't become overtly nationalist. It's become overtly nationalist of a particular type. One of the problems is that let me now be a historian and also be a little academic on this. Nationalism is a stage in history. It's not something that goes back to the Vedic period or the Gupta period or the Mughal period or anything of that kind. It is a change that societies undergo when they start turning towards things like industrialization and capitalism and so on, and the middle class emerges as the most important body. I mean, this is just simple history, but there it is. And nationalism emerges as a way of restructuring the different communities into a new identity and value system. And what is the identity? The identity is the citizen. You move from being a subject of a kingdom to being the citizen of a nation. And the nation is one category among a whole series of states. I mean, you've had clan societies, you've had kingdoms, you've had monarchies, empires, and so on. Now you have a nation state, that the state is a nation. What has happened in this process is a kind of misinformation, or not even information, but a form of disguising nationalism to mean the community that you wish to give priority to. And this happened in the Indian case, where you had an all-India nationalism that talked about the coming Indian citizen in colonial times, and you had a series of other nationalisms, preeminently Islamic, Muslim nationalism and Hindu nationalism, that talked about the coming of a state of a religious kind. You had Pakistan on the one hand, and you had the Hindu Rashtra in the 1930s being defined. And the difference is that a general nationalism of a nation brings all the communities together, gives them a new identity as a citizen, and the new identity is the equality of everybody, equal rights to social justice and the law, equal rights to resources, distribution, and so on. Human rights are guaranteed in the course of being a citizen. But what happens in the case of varieties of nationalism is, whether it's religious or caste or linguistic, that particular group is to be given priority. And so in the Hindu Rashtra, you have, as has been amply written about extensively, you have the Hindu citizen being a notch higher because he has the territory of British India as his Pitri Bhumi and as his Punya Bhumi.
To use Savarkar's famous phrase.
Thesis, yes, and that is really what the whole BJP, Sangh Parivar, RSS thesis is based on. Now, there is therefore a contradiction here, a tension between what many of us understand as nationalism, as such, and what they understand by nationalism, which is Hindu nationalism. It's not the same thing at all. And in a democratic setup where you're talking about the representation of everybody, every citizen, you cannot say some citizens are a notch above, and you cannot give more priority to some citizens. Everybody has to be absolutely equal.
Right.
Now, what do you do then in order to get around this question of defining nationalism as the ideology of the citizen, which means equal rights, equal laws, observing of laws, and all the rest of it, and slightly edging in either a religious or linguistic or caste group. You do it through slogans. So when you look at the slogans that they're giving you, the slogans are all slogans that really deal with the superiority of the Hindu. They're not slogans that deal with the citizen as such. You know, the a-religious citizen.
They in fact negate that concept.
They negate that concept. And this creates a further problem. This kind of nationalism is suggestive of another problem in democracy, which is that, in a sense, democracy is dependent on being secular. You cannot have a democracy where you have predetermined majorities of whatever kind.
Right.
In a democracy, an issue comes up, and the majority comes from every part of society and takes a decision, and the next issue that comes up has a totally different constituent of majority. It doesn't have the same thing.
Right.
Therefore, how do you kind of ensure, without saying that you are a Hindu state, how do you ensure that in fact these little indicators are going to give an identity to the citizen?
Right.
You do it entirely by doing this. And in a sense, I think that this whole vigilante activity, as it is called, which is an activity that is meant to create terror in the country.
And by people who are formally outside the state but who are fully implicated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're doing precisely this. They're bringing in this element into the definition of what is the nation.
Right. But of course they build on, you know, when the BJP or the RSS talks of, they embrace in a formal sense the idea of, they say we need genuine secularism, they criticize others as being pseudo-secular, and what they do is that they question the democratic state's need to, in a way, act in defense of sections which may be linguistic or religious minorities who are disadvantaged in some way. They would decry that as appeasement, as pseudo-secularism, and they latch on to those sorts of protections which are very Gandhian or Rawlsian in any philosophical sense, but they would hold that as somehow subverting the concept of equal citizenship.
But in fact it's not, because the thing is that your own concept of the nation is not supporting equal citizenship fully, and your programs are not supporting equal citizenship. At least if your programs were supporting equal citizenship, one would say yes, it's all right, but you can't allow a situation where some people are more vulnerable than others and yet talk about equal citizenship. And this also ties in a little bit with our definition of secularism, where we keep on talking about the coexistence of religion. And I've been trying to argue that it's more than that, in the sense that it's not just the coexistence, it's the equal rights of every religion to human rights, to the constitutional laws, etc., etc. And secondly, it is that there are certain areas of social functioning where you don't allow religious organizations to call the shots. That they have to be secular, they have to be, through secular institutions, and should not be governed by any religious organization. I mean, in a sense, education also is one of those issues which is going to come up, as if we go on becoming more and more genuinely secular, this issue will come up in a big way.
If the rise of the concept of citizen and citizenship is central, along with the whole discourse or the need for equal rights, equal claims and resources, is central to the idea of the nation, the way it historically evolved, it's ironic that in today's hyper-nationalist times, you have valorization of the nation happening side by side with attempts to convert the citizen back into being a subject in some sense. You will stand up. You will surrender your money. If you don't do this, if you don't do what we say, then somehow you are against the nation. So in the language of nation and nationalism, the citizen is stripped of her citizenship.
You see, again, that seems to me to be, there's an element of insecurity there, where you have to tell the citizen that you will do such and such to prove that you're a good national.
You know, they take out ads in papers saying these are your fundamental duties.
Duties.
They don't do it for rights.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
That they don't talk about rights, and they don't concede that the citizen has the right to say, I'm sorry, but I would like the issue of Kashmir, of Bastar, of the Adivasis, or whatever it may be, the Dalits here, the burning of churches there, whatever it is,
Right.
the issue. I would like it discussed publicly. The media should be taking up these discussions and saying their different points of view and so on. There's nothing anti-national about having discussions on these issues.
Right.
But again, if it's a sense of insecurity, then you start saying, you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do
Right.
that.
Some liberals, some intellectuals respond to the excessive nationalism of our times by, in a way, rejecting the idea of the nation. Do you think in this country, the public intellectual, how should the public intellectual negotiate her way around this whole question? Is the language and discourse of the nation still relevant and an essential part of public discussion, or is it a category that perhaps no longer enjoys the kind of salience that it once did?
Well, I think that the fact that there is a debate going on what is meant by the nation and a national and nationalism means that the nation hasn't really got firmly embedded. This discussion will go on. But because it is a historical phase, as I see it, I also see that there are some parts of the world where they have moved beyond the nation. The European Union was one. I mean, when you consider the relationship between France and Germany and how deeply nationalism, even there and here, is tied into territory. I mean, and I think this is partly the result of cartography and the ability to draw maps and boundary lines and so on, and the boundary line becomes absolutely the firm divider. All of this, I think, is something which is part of a historical phase. And if it can be changed as it was changed in Europe, though goodness knows they may be coming back to the idea of the nation again, but at least for a period of time they weren't. One can think of a possibility of a future, 50 years down the line, when national boundaries may not be so important. I mean, who knows? Historians don't make predictions, but there is an openness about the future. It's not that historically, let me say that the idea of the nation is not something that will go from now to eternity.
Right.
It will undergo some changes, but what those changes will be, one doesn't know.